One of my all-time favorite quotes is, "Listening is not waiting for your turn to talk." I think I've sort of been helped along in that regard a little bit by trying to improve as an interviewer. You just don't learn a whole lot when you're the one talking.
This is Andrew Vance, and you're listening to Choose the Hard Way, the podcast about how hard things build stronger humans who have more fun. You can find us on Instagram at HardwayPod, and please subscribe to the Substack, alwaysthehardway.substack.com. That is the number one way you can support Choose the Hard Way and help me to bring you more of these interviews. Please become a paid subscriber of the Substack and tell all your friends. My guest today is professional multi-surface cyclist Payson McElveen. His palmares include a pair of wins at the Mid-South Gravel Monument and back-to-back marathon mountain bike national championship titles in 2017 and 2018. Payson's adventure films are hugely popular and cover his own go fast adventures, including a White Rim trail fastest known time and capturing the fastest known time for crossing Iceland under human power, not the power of lightning bolt throwing deities, because this is multi-surface cycling. This is not Dungeons and Dragons, although they might be the same thing. Payson's podcast, With Pace, is a great listen, and it's one of the biggest in endurance sports. And he, of course, in a sport full of infinity mustaches, has one of the thickest, fullest, and most famous mustaches. It seems like a good time to be in the Payson business, but a lot goes into doing all of these things that he does. And the hardest ride is the one you don't see on social media. There are hundreds of hours of Payson content out there. And for an adventurer like Payson, it seemed appropriate to take this conversation into uncharted territory. It was a fun one, and I'm excited to share it with you. You can find Payson's fantastic podcast, With Pace, everywhere you listen, and you can get all of the Payson that you need at withpace.cc and at Payson McElveen on Instagram and YouTube. Yes, you can find those links in the show notes. I appreciate you listening to Choose the Hard Way and sharing the show with your pals. Right now, less than 5% of listeners have rated the show on iTunes, and even lower rate over on Spotify. And I'd be really grateful if you would take a moment to hit 5 stars and subscribe wherever you listen or watch. It helps more people find these conversations. Whether you've been listening since 2018 or you're new here, the number one thing you can do to support this project is to become a paid subscriber to my Substack. You can find the link in my bio at HardwayPod on Instagram. You can go to alwaysthehardway.substack.com or just search for Choose the Hard Way in the Substack app, because I know many of you stack. The media landscape has changed, and long-form podcasts are now a mission-critical channel for anyone who wants to connect with their target audience and build influence. That's why I started my consultancy, One Real Voice, to coach senior leaders, professional athletes, venture partners, everyone in the world who's working to build influence, politicians, to be great podcast guests or hosts. If you have a podcast or if you're starting one, I also provide strategic guidance to help you create a roadmap that works today and over time. Set yourself up to win from the beginning and keep on winning with every episode. When you're ready to be great, DM me at HardwayPod or email hello@onerealvoice.com. And you might want to think about spending some of your professional development budget for yourself or for your team members who go on podcasts. Just reach out to me at HardwayPod or email hello@onerealvoice.com. Crypto curious? With over $1 trillion in transactions to date, blockchain.com is your trusted partner on your crypto journey. Go to blockchain.com to get started today. No experience required. And special thanks to blockchain.com for being the title sponsor of Choose the Hard Way. Lauf is the Apple of bike design, and they make elegant products that just work better than everything else. Check them out at laufcycles.com. Live, laugh, love. I love mine. I love my Utald. I love my Segla. I'm hoping to get on the mountain bike because I've been mountain biking with the kids lately, and I'd love to rip on that Lauf mountain bike. This podcast is also brought to you by my best-in-class partners at Palm Tree Podco. They're a full-service podcast studio, and they'll help any brand, business, or individual sound great. So find them at palmtreepodco.com. Is that a quad-handled coffee mug? I've never seen one of those.
Dude, I found this in Hobart, Australia, Hobart, Tasmania, at the Mona Museum. And it's pretty corny, but when I saw it, I was like, I can't believe this is the first time I've seen this idea done. So I just had to buy it. Plus, I have an obsession with Tasmania. So anytime I can bring something home that reminds me of that place, then I'm going to probably do it.
What started the Tasmania obsession? Was it Richie Port?
No, but we've sort of struck up a little bit of an online friendship after the fact. No, Tasmania came about because it's sort of a long story, but in 2021, I went on a bike tour trip with Lael Wilcox, her partner Rue, Chris Burkhardt, and my wife Nicole. And it was a bit of a media trip, sort of establishing this new route in the West Fjords of Iceland. And when we were over there, Chris just sort of offhandedly mentioned that no one had ridden across Iceland coast to coast before, and that he figured it'd be a cool challenge. And so sort of somewhat spontaneously, I decided to do that, and we made a little film out of it, kind of shoestring budget-wise, and it ended up being the coolest bike experience I'd had to date, which was really surprising at the time. In hindsight, makes a lot of sense. But
what made it so cool?
A lot of things, but I'm sure some people listening will be able to relate to how rich experiences often are when you're doing something hard. And the combination of doing something harder than probably I'd ever done, I think heightened just the general like tourist experience in a way. And Iceland is such a unique place. Definitely never been anywhere like that. It almost felt like I was had my own little moon landing mission. And it was the first time that I'd kind of pushed endurance that far. And when you finish something like that, there's a certain relationship you end up kind of having with the place. Just a really rich sort of richer understanding. And then also just to kind of pull the project together, there's a certain amount of cooperation required with locals, unless you're being a complete idiot about it and don't get their support and perspective. And so, yeah, I just felt really connected to the place and immediately thought, well, doing crossings like this in other parts of the world seemed like a pretty cool thing to explore. So I just started making a list, and Tasmania was the next one on the list. And it even surpassed Iceland in some ways. But Tasmania has been a little bit different in that it remains, maybe besides Durango, the favorite place I've ever been. There's just a whole bunch of, for one, I think island cultures are really unique and interesting because they're insular, and there's a certain cooperation that happens, especially when it's a smaller island. At least that's how it feels to me. And just the exoticism of Tasmania was really fascinating too. And it just sort of feels like a little piece of the planet that's kind of been set aside and not been impacted maybe by a lot of the other things that our world is. It's like a little national park, but it's a whole place, a whole community, a whole island. So we just got pretty obsessed with it and actually ended up going back and getting married there last year.
So you got a bit of a relationship with Tasmania. It's gone as deep as marriage.
It has, and I always say that if I get canceled for some reason and I have to go hide out, probably you could find me in Tasmania.
There was a lot in this anecdote. So maybe go back to Iceland for a minute. You said that was one of the harder things that you've done. So when something is challenging for you, you've done a lot of remarkable things as an athlete and also as someone who's a storyteller, and a lot of projects that from the outside look like they probably have a very high degree of logistical complexity, I would guess. Something like Iceland, when that experience becomes difficult, what aspect of it felt challenging to you?
I mean, there were a lot of things that sort of made me nervous during, but also before. We had kind of a crazy, for anyone who's familiar with Iceland, you'll know that it's just a really volatile place, geologically and environmentally. And so we had this route developed that was more or less the most direct path across. And most of Iceland, the entire interior is made up of what they call the Icelandic highlands. And it basically just looks like the moon. It's just a volcanic rockscape intermixed with, glacial rivers, literally fire and ice. And so I was trying to, make the most direct route across all of that. But like 36 hours before, there was this thermal vent that opened up under a glacier and melted a bunch of ice and created this little mini flood. And it washed out a pretty key section of road. And so just the day before, we had to come up with this totally crazy reroute that added some distance. And that was the first time I was kind of like, oof, am I up for this? Like, this seems a little foolish, being so inexperienced with ultra and all that sort of thing. So that's, in a way, that was hard, I guess, mentally. But the counterintuitively, one of the harder moments was, since we were documenting the thing, there were vehicles around for some of the ride, which very much changes the experience and isn't how I always like to do these sorts of things, but had a feeling it'd be pretty cool and wanted to kind of share the experience. So we decided to make a film about it. But maybe 3/4 of the way in, it had been raining for the past 6 or 8 hours. It was kind of high 30 degrees, which is like the worst combo. You'd kind of rather have snow or I know you live in New England, so you're well aware of this sort of weather. Just kind of a tough combo. And I was just tired of being cold and getting sideways rain blown in my face and had to stop to try to figure out a different way to warm up my hands because I was losing the ability to shift and brake. And when I stopped, one of the vehicles that had the filmers in it also stopped. And they were maybe, 20 yards away. And when they opened the door, just this rush of warm air just came flooding down and just, like wrapped around me. And ironically, having crew there, film crew, made it harder in a lot of ways because I had this really easy out to quit. And definitely stood there for 10 or 15 minutes and had to ask myself, how badly I wanted to finish the thing. So that was hard, and things like this, are always physically hard, but by far and away, the mental challenge is far, far greater, but also where, a lot of the growth happens, for sure.
Yeah. Not many people out there have probably experienced having a thermal vent open and melting a glacier, disrupting their ride. Although I do know we do have listeners in Iceland, and Lauf is
cool.
my bike sponsor.
Yeah, it's true.
But when that happened and you got that news, how do you personally metabolize a moment like that?
With the flood?
Yeah, like you get some bad news. I'm assuming you put quite a bit of time and effort into getting there. You have this crew with you. You've got vehicles. This thing kind of has to happen, right? And then you get news like, hey, we're going to have to change the route.
Yeah. Well, the first thing you do is you ask the locals, what's the story here? Is this normal? Is this bad? Is this okay? Icelandic people are really, really tough people, and they're very familiar with living in a place like this. So they brushed it off. They're like, oh yeah, it'll be no problem. But it was a little bit of a wake up call. Just that this route was going to kind of put you at the whim of Mother Nature, maybe more than other stuff I'd experienced before. But like I kind of said earlier, that's part of, I'm really glad that happened because it was a really neat learning opportunity. I learned something about, thermal vents and the environment of Iceland. And I just love building routes and sitting down with maps and all that sort of thing. So sitting down with the locals that we had on the team to kind of figure out a plan B was a really cool kind of plot twist that in hindsight I really enjoyed, but was certainly a little stressful in the moment at first.
Did you get upset at all, or did you just jump to, I'm going to find a solution to this?
No, it's funny. I don't really get upset during things like this. And don't really so much when setbacks happen in more traditional races either, unless it's like a mechanical issue or a crash. But if there's some frustrating weather thing that happens, or you miss a split, or, someone you're up against ends up being stronger than you expect, I think I've just raced for so long and gone through so many of those roller coaster moments, those unexpected twists and turns of doing hard stuff on a bike, whether it's a race or a crossing, that you kind of learn to have more of a level head about it and just kind of focus on the problem solving. So yeah, I don't think I got too emotional in that moment, really.
People see the outputs of these adventures that you do. They see the films, they listen to your podcast, they see you on Instagram. For some of the bigger projects, can you talk a bit about the mechanics of what goes into doing something like Iceland? You're a Red Bull athlete, and I know Red Bull athletes have their internal person they work with, and you pitch projects and all of that. But could you talk about that for people who don't understand how that works, which is most people?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a rat's nest. It's not, the finished product hopefully looks cool and polished and isn't, enjoyable for folks to watch, but it's so much work, and it's the reason that we really only do one every other year. It's an enormous time suck. It's a fun project, but I would say or a fun process, but the hardest part is just the fundraising, because filmmaking is really expensive, even, the humble ones we do. And there's just so much more involved when you want to do them on the other side of the world too. We could sort of, the original one was the White Rim FKT, and, that's just next door. That's less than a 3-hour drive. And the difference in budget required for something like that versus making a film on the other side of the world is really significant. And one thing we've gained an appreciation for over the years is just how important the crew is, not only in terms of their filmmaking abilities, but just their personality, their hardiness, whether they're people that you want to be on the road with in a van for 2+ weeks. Like, those considerations are even more important, I think. And so we've kind of continued working with the same crew for the last couple, and they're extremely accomplished filmmakers, and as such, not the cheapest rates. And so there's an added layer, of funding them for that reason. We could certainly do them on a more shoestring budget, but they're such highlights for me that you just kind of want to do it right. But it's months and months of fundraising and talking to sponsors, and to be totally honest, I don't think I'm very good at it still. Learning a lot every time, but key to it is figuring out what brands have coming up in terms of product releases, or maybe some, something they're working on brand wise that they want to create some assets for. You can't just be like, hey, I like riding my bike far, can you please pay for it? Like, you gotta give them something of value beyond just that. So I mean, at the end of the day, we've only done 3, and so there's still a lot to learn, but we keep doing it, so apparently it's worth it.
During the generative phase of coming up with these ideas, what ideas have you discarded? Because I bet to get to these 3, there are probably a lot of other ideas that seem great and they just weren't a fit for whatever reason.
Yeah. I mean, so there's just as an example, I have one idea that's sort of like my white buffalo idea. That's not a crossing. It's more of a almost like a man versus machine sort of concept. That's more local to us, but requires some pretty significant road closures.
I love the vagueness here. I love it.
Just has an astronomical price tag. And dude, I've been pitching it for years, and it's just one of those things where it's going to require budgets from departments that get more funding than the bike department does typically. And so finding the right fit for all that has been a challenge. So that's one that I really want to do that just hasn't worked out yet. But there's a lot, sometimes it's just timing, like for example, this year I actually really wanted to do another one this fall. But ended up deciding to do this new 7-day stage race in South Africa called Gravel Burn that's being put on by the folks that started Cape Epic. And so, there's only 12 months in the year, and the season is so long that when you tack on a race in early November, if we were to go do another big project that would take us to the end of November, then you got to take some semblance of an off season. That's halfway through December. And then with the way the season kicks off these days, halfway through December is way too late to start training at this point. So balancing the racing part of my life with these other things is probably the single biggest challenge to making them happen.
So you mentioned that fundraising, it sounds like for you, is something you have to do and an area where you feel you could continue to grow. What other areas of your professional life do you find to be challenging to do, or you've had to learn new skills just to put together this whole range of things that you're doing?
It sounds super, I don't know, lame maybe, but just time management. The blessing and the curse of this weird corner of professional cycling is that kind of the more you put into the off bike stuff, the more payoff there can be. And I've certainly fallen into the trap of that just sort of perpetual cycle. And I think it's a really fortunate position to be in that this scene is kind of blown up and we do have real professional opportunities. But I think one of my worst fears is getting sucked into those professional opportunities and looking back and regretting that I didn't give the athletics side my all. And so the last few years I've kind of had to sort of make some adjustments in regards to how I prioritize that. Because you really can just sit at your laptop all day and hammer out emails and proposals and ideas and all that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, you're sort of working an office job, even though you think you're living your childhood dream. So just kind of finding that balance, and it ebbs and flows. But I'd say that's one of the things that I've had to work on the most the last handful of years.
Who do you want to be as a professional athlete?
Gosh, I don't really think about that, but maybe I should. I think I just want to look back with pride, knowing that I gave it my all. And also, I don't know that I need to be an athlete or a racer who kind of this is sort of an oxymoron compared to what I just said, but I'd like to give it my all athletically, but I also don't want to have been someone who kind of forgot to be human along the way and just sacrificed everything to be marginally faster. And I think everyone kind of, regardless of the sport, has to find their line there. There's many of the greatest athletes in the world, obviously, are notoriously to one extreme. They as people, maybe just bulldoze their way through everything so that they could be Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods or whatever. And as a 16 or 17, or sorry, earlier, as a 12-year-old growing up, watching Lance dominate the tours, at the time, that's what I thought I wanted to be. And I'm really grateful that my path ended up not being toward that really structured area of the sport where it's easier maybe to be a 100% athlete, because I think I would have been a lot more unhappy and would have gotten sucked into that way of doing things. So the fact that I ended up in this sort of other weird corner has afforded me, I think, a lot more balance that I'm grateful for. And still, I feel like I have the opportunity to really get close to my full potential. And so I think that's all you could ask for, really.
What do you want to get out of what you do professionally as an athlete and with the creative projects you do?
Like long-term, big picture, you mean?
You tell me.
I don't know, man. Like I'm not a very organized person. And so a lot of this stuff is just like, it comes about from staring at the ceiling at night, not being able to fall asleep, and just thinking like, I have to go do that. Like I have to see that idea through. So I'm really just following my nose. I don't have some sort of grand scheme. It's been very experimental, and fortunately brands have found value in being part of it so that I can do it for a living. But there are certainly plenty of athletes that are way more dialed and have way more of a greater vision than I do.
What do you hope people get out of what you're giving the world through what you do as an athlete and a creator?
Yeah. Fair. So I think it kind of falls into a couple of different buckets. With the podcast, I really think that just sort of long form communication and human conversation is eroding a little bit, not to sound too doom and gloom. And I just really enjoy kind of fostering those sorts of encounters, and then maybe hopefully inspiring people to seek those in their lives too. Those sorts of human to human encounters. And I guess some of the film projects we do and the big adventure projects are somewhat adjacent in that I just have this like burning curiosity across the board, whether it's learning about other people or seeing new places. And I think they're all just sort of born out of that, just trying to make the most of my time here, and hopefully reminding others to do the same a little bit.
What have you learned about people from having had so many podcast guests and conversations? Because certainly patterns emerge over time. And also sometimes people we think we know quite well from other podcast episodes, from their public persona, turn out to be quite different when you sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that so many things that I feel or you feel or whoever comes on the podcast feels, those are shared experiences very often, regardless of what walk of life you come from, what success level, what level of notoriety, what circles you run in. So often I'm reminded that there are shared common human experiences. So many people struggle with the same things, regardless of success level or whatever. Everyone has their insecurities. Everyone has their fears. Everyone has their worries, things that inspire them. And there's been way more crossover there than I would have ever guessed.
Has doing the podcast changed how you yourself approach life in any way directly?
I think so. I think I've gotten better at listening. One of my all-time favorite quotes is, "Listening is not waiting for your turn to talk." and yeah, I think I've sort of been helped along in that regard a little bit by trying to improve as an interviewer. Yeah, you just don't learn a whole lot when you're the one talking. And that's not to say that, you should just shut up and like go around eavesdropping, but I do think listening is can be a learned skill. And when you tune into it, it can be pretty jarring to try to have a conversation with someone who really has trouble listening, and there isn't actually a whole lot of transfer of information. It's more just sort of like I say something, then you say something. So I think I've gotten a little bit more in tune with that, and it's also made me really get fired up and appreciate when I am having a conversation with someone, whether it's on the podcast or just someone I run into in the grocery store, and you can tell that they're really engaged and interested in what you're saying. And I've also found that makes people feel really good. Like if they feel like you're looking them in the eye and listening to what they have to say and responding specifically to what they're sharing with you, automatically there's this human connection that I think feels really powerful. And so, yeah, I guess that's something that I've just sort of gotten a little bit more in tune with thanks in part to doing the podcast.
Going back to something you mentioned earlier about the erosion of humans to have the capacity to have conversations or interface face to face like this,
Yep.
even digitally, it does seem like one of the greatest gifts we can give other people is our attention, our full attention and presence. And that's what deep listening is all about.
For sure. And I think it's gotten a little bit harder just because of, ironically, like how much more peripherally we are connected, with these dang phones. Like you can always sort of be in contact with others with information. And it's always, for me at least, it's kind of, always tugging me to the side a little bit. It's always this distraction. So I think that's something, it's a very active thing you have to kind of like be actively thinking about, I think, because the amount of communication flying around can almost like, I don't know if I was born with ADD, but I certainly feel like I can have it to an extent now just because there's so much sort of flying around. But I think it makes the ability to, like you're saying, give someone your full attention that much more valuable. And I don't want to sound all doomsday, that we're, completely losing the ability to do that. But I do think on average, it's a little bit harder now because of, everything that's flying around so easily information wise.
It's insidious too. And something I don't think everyone considers, but if we think about text messages, for example, I was thinking about this recently, how quickly we've gone from text messages are like, it's a simple and direct way just to exchange information. We respond to them. I don't know when they were introduced, but when like the 5 emojis were introduced that you could use to respond to a text message, which is, it's a heuristic for some meaning, if you give someone a thumbs up, a smiley face, whatever, and then that kind of becomes the default in a lot of instances for how people respond to receiving information. But it's a synthetic form of communication. And why did we become okay with our interactions being reduced to 5 symbols? And, like all symbols are a shortcut. The characters we use in an alphabet are a shortcut to make words, et cetera. But at a certain point, it's like, am I actually saying anything? Or is this some approximation of responding to something someone sent me that might actually have real meaning and they might have a need to be interacted with?
Yeah. No, it's so true. And I think the lost art of reading is such a good way to be reminded of this. You know, it's almost embarrassing, but I've been trying to read more lately, and really enjoying reading more lately. But I picked up Angle of Repose last week, and it felt dense to me, just like when it's just a little bit harder to read a book. The vocabulary had a greater density to it that I was expecting, and I just felt a little rusty. I was like, oh man, what a shame to have such an iconic piece of literature kind of feel like work right now to get through. And I haven't liked that. And so I'm kind of doubling down on reading. It sounds so silly, but I'm going to practice more. And hopefully get back to a point where I can really fully enjoy. I am enjoying it, but I think you get my point here. Maybe too many emojis in my life over the last few years, and need to get back to some good weighty pieces of literature.
It brings with it a different quality of experience and attention when you sit down with a book.
Yeah.
But, I think any amount of reading is great. I've gone through that same experience the past couple of years, and picking up, whether it's something relatively simple or something quite dense.
Mm-hmm.
Like I read a China Miéville novel that took me a year and a half to read. I think it was 750 pages, and it was a genre I don't typically read.
Yeah.
But just for me, it had a different degree and tonality of pleasure than other activities that I do. And I had forgotten how much I liked it. And I feel I still now, I love to read, and I feel this high degree of resistance to sitting down with a book, even though I love it, because there's so much temptation to do other things that are productive with your attention. Right.
Well, and you write professionally some. So like, have you found that, you wrote that Aussie article recently, for example, have you found that like there's a certain, do you have word fatigue? Do you find yourself like not really reaching for a book when you're working on a big article?
I always love reading when I make time for it. And I think it's the paradox of feeling a constant pressure to do something with time that is productive. And the reality, I think, is that doing nothing often is the most productive thing to do with our time. And I think a lot about optimizing.
Okay, I don't know that word.
What's the opposite of optimizing? Like the opposite of marginal gains, right? Just literally do nothing. And I've talked about this a fair amount on this podcast and on my Substack that, I've meditated now for nearly 25 years off and on, and I've gotten quite into Zen Buddhism the past couple of years. And I joined a Sangha. And for me, some really interesting parallels have emerged between my practice of podcasting, of writing, and what happens when I go and sit with my Zen community at Sangha. And one of the things that I've realized is just making space. I mean, meditation is not nothing. It's something different than nothing, but having time in your day when you're stillness and stopping are a fundamental aspect of Zen practice and of meditation generally, because it's only by stopping, whether that's walking meditation, sitting meditation, or even in the context of a conversation like this, approaching it with mindfulness and with the quality of deep listening, that then insight can potentially emerge through giving our conscious awareness and presence to what we're doing. And that just has shown to me that when we stop, something completely different happens. It's transformative. And it is interesting because I also, like you and like many people, I love things like having a training program that's periodized and seeing improvement over time and seeing like, what can my body do? And that takes action. But the opposite of that is stopping and doing nothing. And, I know that you've gone through these cycles of injury and recovery a number of times in the past few years. I'm curious, what has that experience been like for you when everything else that you do is really oriented around action, progression, creation?
Yeah. Again, something I've gotten better at over time. For whatever reason, I do seem, for lack of a better term, a little bit fragile. Like, I've had a lot of injuries, which also means I've had a lot of practice returning from injuries. And it does seem like, although maybe when I hit the ground, I have maybe a greater likelihood of hurting myself, it also seems like I have a really amazing capacity to heal, which I'm grateful for. But even still, I'm figuring out what that should look like, especially kind of in the context of long-term and like greater overall health. And also just the toll that it can take on you mentally. I guess rewind. I mean, I had injuries before this, but sort of this like 4-year block for whatever reason of kind of more significant injuries started in 2022. It was the first year of the Grand Prix, and it was my first race of the year at Mid-South, and went down, broke my left hand, right collarbone, and just the sheer like emotional distraughtness that I felt of being so excited for this new Grand Prix thing and the opportunity that I thought it could create, and just being sidelined before it even started was, really dark stuff mentally. And I think it's kind of, maybe easy to dismiss those feelings because it's like, oh, it's just sports. So, you get paid to ride a bike, like get over it. You'll be fine. Not life-threatening injuries, all that sort of thing. But the thing that I kind of think is important to remember is like, it sounds cheesy, but it's like been my life's work, since I was 8 years old, started dreaming of doing this. Being a professional bike rider has consumed my daily life as long as I can remember in some form or another. And to have that be thrown into doubt can be pretty tough emotionally. And I didn't necessarily handle it the best then in 2022.
How did you handle it? Like, what was the darkness like?
Oh, just enormous doubts and like, you'll never get back to where you were. Sponsors are going to pull out. Your damaged goods, all the negative doubt stuff. And you kind of use that anxiety as fuel to heal and do all the work. Cause at the end of the day, rehabbing from injury is just work. It's just a different form of manual labor and in a lot of ways. And just going to the doctor's appointments, it's so logistically, even down to the paperwork of dealing with health insurance, it's just a lot. Anyway, fast forwarding to this year when I went down at Sea Otter, I definitely dealt with it a lot better. And frankly, one of the things that helped is, I'm a really big NBA fan, and the NBA playoffs were happening at the same time. And for whatever reason this year, the number of star players that were going down with torn Achilles and whatever else, like really big catastrophic injuries, was just through the roof. I mean, the injuries in the NBA are always high, but this playoff season seemed really, really high. And I was just sort of absorbing how these players, how the teams, and how the general discourse was around these injuries. And I really was able to accept this year that it's just part of the job. And there isn't something wrong with me. There are great athletes who just have a tendency to get hurt more often, whether it's bad luck or a body composition thing or, being more mistake prone, whatever it is, it's not something that I should feel shame about or like it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's part of professional sports. And when I could kind of compartmentalize that it's part of the job and getting back to a competitive level as efficiently and responsibly as I could is also just part of the job, I was able to more just go to work doing the steps. And it was just hugely freeing. And it took a little bit of time to get my confidence back just because there was a little bit of fear involved. Like at Oregon Trail, for example, I was definitely descending pretty conservatively. But once that piece clicked, it's almost like the injury never happened. I've been able to completely compartmentalize it. Yeah, when I look at the Grand Prix standings, it kind of sucks to know that I'm going to have to score a 0 this year. But even that is just sort of like Steph Curry went out in the second round last year. Oh, well, he's still fucking Steph Curry. He's going to come back next year. It's going to be fine. So, yeah, I guess that's where I'm at this point with it.
How did you go from where you were after that injury at the Mid-South to where you are now in terms of the mental aspect of this? Because, with NBA teams, MLB, other professional sports, they have a high performance team around them. They're extremely highly compensated and they have experts to get them back in the game. Or even if we think about within the world of like world tour cycling, if you watch the Cavendish documentary, for example, where he talks about his struggles with his eating disorder and depression, mental health issues, he has, he gets in therapy, which he finds to be helpful. The conclusion of that Cavendish storyline where he wins and that kind of fixes his depression, I found to be a bit interesting.
Yeah, fair. No, valid point. Valid point.
But like when you're a privateer, granted you are a Red Bull athlete and it does seem you probably have access to more high performance coaching and resources than the average bear out there. But what did that look like for you to get your head to where you wanted it to be back in the game and to have a bit more of a level approach when these things pop up and just regarding it as part of the job?
Yeah, I think it was just kind of, like I said, just the experience of having been through it a few times. And like you said, also kind of having the privilege of some greater resources. This go around, I went to Santa Monica to the Red Bull Athlete Performance Center, I think 4 weeks post accident, maybe. And I went in there on crutches, and within 10 days, not only was I walking, not only was I riding, they had me doing light deadlifts. So to go from non-weight bearing to doing resistance training was just incredible. And, just gave me an appreciation for a couple of things. One, the human body's ability to heal, which is just one of the most incredible miracles of life, really. And two, just how good modern physical therapy and rehab is. And it almost felt like the process of healing almost felt like a little bit of a race in a way where you sort of like have this problem. The more effort you put in, oftentimes the greater the outcome, but you have to be smart with your effort. You have to know how to meter your effort. You have to be a little bit tactical. And having the team there really have a ton of experience about how much you can push the pace safely was really cool. Having some guys and gals there who have brought some of the top Olympians back. Lindsey Vonn was in the gym every day. I was there. Just being in this environment of excellence was just so confidence inspiring, and having someone who's been through it say, doing this move, this rehab modality, whatever, it's going to hurt, but that pain is okay pain, was just massive. And, definitely not something I take for granted. I don't know how many months they shaved off my return timeline, but, you know, going from sort of the outlook that my average ortho was giving me, who didn't have sort of professional athlete experience, juxtaposing that to the timeline that we were able to work with at Red Bull was pretty insane. So I definitely don't take that for granted.
Who are the team of people that you have around you in addition to the Red Bull team or that whole apparatus? Who else is part of your ecosystem to help you do what you do?
The biggest one's my wife, for sure. The voice of reason, the spreadsheet master. Yeah, she keeps the train on the tracks, both from a logistical standpoint, a bookkeeping standpoint, but also obviously emotional standpoint and just life standpoint. She's certainly top of the pyramid. And then of course Red Bull is a big piece. My longest running sponsor, who I've been with since I was 18, is Orange Seal, and they've been we've sort of like grown in tandem in a way. And they started this performance program called the Orange Seal Academy, where they brought in this really awesome coach, Dennis Van Winden, who lives over in Girona, had a really solid career on the world tour and is just really plugged in with the scene over there. You know, he's in direct communication with the Visma coaches and a lot of the cutting edge stuff that is happening in world tour cycling, and just sort of having that resource, that direct conduit to adjusting what we do has been huge. The way my training has changed over the last few years is crazy, and in a lot of ways really counterintuitive, but been effective. So they're a huge piece. Oh boy. On the podcast side of things, my sister Lily edits the podcast, and we're in almost daily communication on that project. And that's been a really gratifying piece of what I do, and also, provides a lot of balance. I mean, the list is long, and it kind of depends on how you want to categorize it too, because really every single sponsor contributes in some way. I have such a wonderfully open line of communication with these brands, the people that work there, that we're always bouncing ideas off of each other about, super granular stuff like, tire compounds and just super nerdy stuff, which I enjoy. So there's no way I could name everybody. It's just sort of like a 360-degree environment of communication, and kind of like we were talking about, just at the end of the day, it's just people talking to people, sharing ideas, and just trying to make sense of what's going to help me be better at my job.
When you think about success at the highest level of anything, whether that's being an executive, being a professional athlete, I don't know, being the best therapist in the world, whatever therapist might be slightly different, but it requires a tremendous degree of self-centeredness, really. And like, you have to put yourself at the middle of everything.
Yep.
And like, how does that feel for you? Or how do you think about who you are when you're not this?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. To be honest, sorry to keep bringing up the podcast, but that's been such a lifeline. Just putting true effort towards elevating someone else once a week has been massively helpful just for my balance and happiness. Cause you have to be selfish for sure. And you have to, make some hard decisions about saying no to going out with friends, and, maybe kind of being a jerk when it comes to your time management and all that sort of thing. But having something that I'm really passionate about, that's truly about elevating others, has been enormous. And the podcast can be a big grind, one episode a week when it's an original guest every time. It's not like I sign on with the same buddy every week and we just ramble about whatever. you're doing an interview, and that takes preparation, it takes scheduling, and it's a lot of work. And there have been times where I really want to skip a week or two. But in a lot of ways, it's almost like therapy for me also. And so I think it definitely wasn't a plan for it to be that way. I had no idea that it would be that way, but I think that sort of like side project has been massive in terms of just making this sustainable mentally and emotionally.
What types of conversations on the podcast do you enjoy the most, or when it goes in certain directions, what makes a great conversation for you?
Man, honestly, stories. Just when you get a good storyteller on and they're just sort of like having it unfold for you in a way where there's these twists and turns and really just like a good book. It's just addictive. There's something so human about that. Just that little like mini exploratory discovery experience. I think those are definitely the highlights for me.
How do you like to prepare to do your podcast?
Pretty minimally, honestly. And that's on purpose. I will do just enough research to have a very general framework and make sure that I have a foundation of, kind of the person's history a little bit. But I really want to be on the exploratory journey with the listeners. I want, when I learn something, for it to sound genuine, for there to be genuine surprise, genuine interest, genuine follow-up questions. And if, in my experience, for me at least, if I over-research and I know the direction that things are going to go, it's not as fun for me. And I think it feels a bit more dry for the listener probably too.
Going back to bike racing for a minute, how has your approach to the mental side of racing, travel, recovery, how's that shifted from when you started? Let's not start at 8 years old if that's when you began in earnest. If we think about maybe let's start at 18 when you pick up this Orange Seal sponsorship, and I have bikes filled with Orange Seal and my tires downstairs, so I'm a user of the product.
Cool.
How has that shifted, and how do you keep your head in the game? Are there any practices that you have today before, during, or after competing?
Yeah, I think a couple things there. One, I've gained a greater appreciation for rest between effort. So whether that's a hard training block or between races, I didn't necessarily respect the physical drain that emotional or mental output can have. Once I started to have an actual career doing this, it was so exciting that I really was just kind of like running around like a little bit of an idiot all the time. Everything was a yes to every travel opportunity, to going out to dinners, to, post-race parties, just sort of like doing all the things. And I think that really put a ceiling on my athletic ability. And so I've gained a much greater appreciation for kind of like we've been talking about, just sort of shutting things down a bit and actually resting both physically and mentally when the opportunity presents itself. I still really love doing all those things, but just in a little bit more of a metered way. In regards to the preparation for the races and like I forget how you phrased it, but maybe sort of like getting mentally geared up, being prepared. That hasn't gotten easier, interestingly. Like I still often get really, really nervous. It depends on the race, but I think part of it is just with this Grand Prix series, every major race is connected to all the others. If you have a tough sea otter, it's affecting your entire schedule until late October. And that is heavy. I think some folks who have stepped away from the Grand Prix, I know, have done that to kind of get away from that season-long pressure. Because it is somewhat unique. Like the Mountain Bike World Cup is that way. But, World Tour road cycling isn't really. It's, there's so many opportunities for success there. If you have a bad Roubaix, it's okay. There's worlds, there's tour stages, there's all of these opportunities. Not to compare what we do to what they do. They're gulfs apart, but it's just a different structure. And learning to manage that is an ongoing challenge, to really like focus on the present and not think about this points tally and all that sort of thing has been an interesting development. But it's professional sports. I mean, that's how most professional sports are, right? Like your record for the year matters. All the games are connected. I think road cycling is a little bit unique in how disparate the season is, I guess.
Yeah, and the casual fan might not understand how critical arousal management is to succeeding as a professional athlete and having the ability to up or down regulate precisely when you need to. That's what the very, very best in the world, they can take a nap and then get up and get on a starting line. Right. Yeah. But to your point, to get into maybe a specific story here, let's talk about Leadville for a second. So you're coming back from injury. How are you actually feeling in the days leading up to the race? And when you get on the starting line, how do you feel that morning?
It was a bit of a roller coaster, throughout the month beforehand training. I'd say 3 weeks before Leadville, training started going really well. We started seeing some really awesome numbers, which was a big relief. Then I went to the stage race. That went well. That was another confidence boost. But sort of what I didn't expect is then the 2 weeks between got pretty tough mentally again. And it was sort of like the confidence boost was very momentary. And I somehow convinced myself that it, really didn't matter. And I guess, to an extent that's true. You still have to put it together on the day. And so I was really nervous before Leadville and just putting a lot of pressure on myself. I think part of that is just the context of a few years of, last year I had an awesome season with really no hiccups, but the 2 years before that, like we've talked about, I had some injuries. So there's sort of all that baked in. And for me, the hardest part is until the alarm goes off that morning. When the alarm goes off on race morning, it's so early and you have so much to do before you get to the start line and the gun actually goes off that you kind of the race almost starts. You're eating the amount of breakfast you need to eat. You're getting all the equipment you need to get. You're communicating with your team, making it, to downtown Leadville in time to get on the rollers and there's so many extra layers of what we do now, whether it's, the 15-minute activation I do, which, is new in the last few years, or getting the bicarb down, at the right time interval. It sounds ridiculous, but making a decision about whether, you hit a gel 15 minutes before, half a bottle of mix, all of these little things that you can hyperanalyze, that morning really flies by. And before you know it, you're on the start line and, the national anthem's going. And there's still a lot of tension, but to an extent, because you're just focused on doing, the tension kind of gets pushed into the background a little bit. When the tension completely releases counterintuitively is when the gun goes off, you clip in and you go, because then you're just reacting. You're focused on, whose bar plug just hit you in the hip, are they pushing me off the road? Are they moving up underneath? You're just going through the process and all of the instincts kind of kick back in. And, then it gets fun again. The actual racing most of the time is fun. The lead up to the racing can be tough.
So during that lead up to the racing, 2 weeks out, you're starting to have some doubts. That internal monologue is maybe starting. Is the training working? Am I healed from the injury? Am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to deliver? What's your process for handling that? Who do you talk to? Or do you just stuff it?
I really, to be completely frank, I only talk to two people about that stuff, and it's my wife and my coach. And the work kind of, even though I was having good workouts, you know, we could tell that like I'd gotten my threshold up to a point where I could be competitive again, but we didn't really have time to do some of those like huge KJ days where you do 6 hours and you do some fatigue resistance intervals in the last hour. There just weren't really enough weeks between injury and the race to execute those. So that was sort of in the back of my mind. I don't have the highest threshold of a lot of the guys I race with, but that fatigue resistance is for whatever reason sort of like my strength. And so I was somewhat optimistic that that would just still be there. But that was a lot of the dialogue that was going on, was with my coach being like, dude, I really wish we hit one of those rides where I was doing some, you know, VO2s at hour 6, you know, why didn't we just work in one? And him, you know, just sort of explaining how all the pieces work together and it's going to be okay. And, so it's just a lot of communication with my wife and my coach as those doubts kind of surface.
Did talking about it help?
Yeah. I have, especially, I mean, with all respect to my wife, Nicole, you know, when my coach tells me that the training is right, I believe it. He's so good at what he does, and he's really good at explaining why we're doing what we're doing. And so Nicole is more of the like, trust the process, and Dennis is more like, trust the interval. And together, you know, it helps.
Payson, we know there are more big creative projects ahead for you. We know there are more races, more adventures. To focus on the creative side of things, what have you not done or made yet that you're interested in doing? Do you have any big projects in mind that we might see coming down the road, or maybe after your life as a professional athlete? What would you like to do?
I mean, sort of we'll keep checking off kind of the crossings, just because I'm obsessed with them. They're probably the coolest thing I get to do. But in terms of post racing career, like when I'm done doing this Grand Prix gravel scene, sort of playing in the back of my head is kind of like ultra stuff. And I don't mean like crossing stuff. I mean, you know, Colorado Trail, some of those. And I don't know why necessarily, because I know what a beatdown they are. Like, it is just, I think it's got to be the most destructive form of bike racing based on the little bit of experience I have. But it's just like, because it's there, I just kind of feel this obligation to give it a good solid shot for a little while. And just to see, you know, what I'd be capable of there. And to be clear, you know, there's a big difference between riding across Tasmania for 32 hours and riding across something else for a week or 10 days. You know, those are two very different things. And I have so much respect for the people that do that full time. And by full time, I just mean like it's their thing. They do it year round. It just blows my mind. And I don't think I necessarily want to do that, but I like make it a year round thing, but I'd like to sample it just a little bit because it's such an epic expression of just, endurance sport. And just the distances you're able to cover on a bike is just really incredible. So I'll probably dabble in that at some point, but no time soon.
And any other creative projects that you have in mind or that you want to try?
Right now we're sort of like at the very top of the funnel, kind of like circling this concept in Taiwan. I'm really interested in that country. both culturally and also geographically. Of course, we hear all about the manufacturing industry there. So much of the bike industry comes out of there. But geographically, it's really amazing, and environmentally, it's relatively a small island, but the mountains they have there are just incredible. It's like when you look at it three-dimensionally, the island almost looks like prominence-wise as tall as it is wide. Obviously it's not, but it's a little bit like Hawaii in that regard, where it's just like these mountains just rising out of the ocean. So I'd really like to explore kind of both the manufacturing culture there and sort of its connections to the bike industry, and then also escaping like the crush of all of that industry and juxtaposing it to what sounds like some pretty unbelievable mountains.
Are we getting into more detail here about the human/machine project? Is that what we're talking about?
No. The human versus machine thing is Rocky Mountain based.
Very interesting. So we're not going to see Payson Terminator 5.
No. I'm the human. The machine is I'm going up against the machine. We'll see if that happens. I'm not giving up yet, but it's a big bite. So
whatever you do, don't give up on humans.
I promise I will not do that.
The number one way to support Choose the Hard Way is to become a paid subscriber to my Substack, alwaysthehardway.substack.com. You can also find that link in my link tree at HardwayPod on Instagram. Please give me a follow. The Substack is where I share my reflections on these interviews and write about Zen, bikes, and life. For senior executives, pro athletes, and political leaders, podcasts aren't optional anymore. They're mission critical. At One Real Voice, I coach leaders to help them thrive as storytellers and stand out in the long-form podcast conversations where real influence is built. If you have a podcast or you're starting one, perhaps someone at your business said, "Hey, let's start a podcast." Well, I also provide strategic guidance to help you create a roadmap that works today and over time. Set yourself up to win from the beginning and keep on winning with every episode. When you're ready to be great, DM me at HardwayPod or email hello@onerealvoice.com. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe and do humanity a favor when you hit 5 stars. Crypto curious? With over $1 trillion in transactions to date, blockchain.com is your trusted partner on your crypto journey. Go to blockchain.com to get started today. No experience required. And thank you to blockchain.com for being the title sponsor of Choose the Hard Way. When I gravel and all-road, I pedal on Lauf bicycles. Why? Because they make elegant, innovative products that just work better than everything else. Check them out today at laufcycles.com. Tell them Andrew sent you. This podcast is also brought to you by my production partners at Palm Tree Podco. They're a full-service podcast studio with end-to-end services to help any brand, business, or individual stand out in the podcast landscape. You can find them at palmtreepodco.com. Thanks for listening, and you'll hear me. I'll see you. We'll be together again soon. Next time